Well, folks, it's your old pal King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. And this is it. The video I've been trying to avoid making, largely just out of, a golden rule kind of a principle of if I don't want to be treated a certain way, I shouldn't do it to others. I've very much tried to keep myself in an isolated bubble when it comes to dungeon mastering techniques. Never really been big on reading how the DM in various sections of, core rule books. I've never been big on reading, Dungeon Magazine. I've never really been terribly prone to, reading people's blogs or being on message boards back in the older days of the internet. Closest I ever came was there was a time on Facebook and some of the Palladium groups I'd, make posts about campaign ideas and crap, and generally didn't comment on other people's stuff, though. I was just kind of there to just kind of tag my thing and then leave and then see if anyone actually bothered to comment on it. But, it's an active, purposeful disinterest in what other dungeon masters have to say. And in a way, that's kind of a science experiment. I'm not entirely sure what my real core motivation, but it's just something that's kind of just been a thing of mine pretty much since the beginning. So in this video, I'm going to, kind of break a cardinal rule and, maybe tell you your business a little bit in terms of how I feel one should approach dungeon mastering in general, game mastering, storytelling, lore keeping, whatever the exact terminology for your game. They all are part of a greater genre. In some ways, this video is a bit of a addendum, counter-response, follow-up to a video I just made, I think the second to last video, which was how to play tabletop role-playing games, and so thus this one is how to run tabletop role-playing games. I will occasionally reference my own work because obviously my way in thinking of dungeon mastering would obviously have great influence on how I decided to design my own rule system and such. So where to begin? What exactly is it that you're doing as a dungeon master? It's a bit more than just being the guy who's running the story, which is kind of your basic pitch on what the whole thing is. And, there is a true aspect to that, but that's just, the tip of the iceberg, so to say, when it comes to what you're actually doing. I liken it most to being a franchise manager. You're an independent volunteer franchise manager who's not paid. And in terms of what kind of franchise it is, there is, aspects of it that are a little theatrical. There's aspects of it that are a little sporting. There's aspects of it that's a little like running a gambling house. But, actually, the thing I would think you can compare it the best to is theme park management. Now, I'm not one of those people. I'm not a big theme park person. I've been to, Astroworld once and Six Flags twice, I want to say, in total, as far as I can remember clearly from back in the day. And it's been quite a long time since I've bothered being on a roller coaster. However, when you go back to the origins of Walt Disneyland and stuff like that, and one of the whole big reasons why Disney is the way Disney is it's all really about theme park themes. You want, you're designing your ride and you want it to be fun, but if you want to get people to, get on that ride and understand what all the stuff they're looking at as the ride's taking them around. If they are, based on an established common knowledge type setting that you yourself can have more control over as possible, and or something popular that a lot of people know and recognize, and the more fanciful it could be, the better and more likely you are to have a successful roller coaster ride that has repeat business and people who are interested in getting on it and who actually enjoy the experience. So the roller coaster of what you're doing, the actual track and the rails, is a set chain of scenarios that you're potentially putting together. There's points of divergence where you'll have multiple scenarios that characters can choose from as they negotiate their way through the greater arc of the coaster ride. But you know, the whole point is that all events need to lead into each other. There needs to be a certain kind of momentum, and sometimes it slows down and tension ratchets as you rise up, and other times everything's moving at a swift pace and looping around, and you get your twists and turns. But eventually, at the end, hopefully, you get yourself reset close back to the status quo, much like a television season. So that, you know, when you have your next adventure, the next roller coaster, people are back where they can get off the ride and get back on. The cart in this instance is the rule system that you've chosen to go with, which is often frequently paired with the setting in many cases, because of the way role-playing games have branded themselves as businesses in and of themselves, because obviously the roller coaster thing is an analogy and it works, but there's times where the analogy breaks down because it's not perfect. And as a dungeon master or game master, whatever you want to call yourself, you know, you have to take into account the design of that cart. As much as I said in my previous video on how to play role-playing games, the character sheet is the player character's interface with the world. And so in the same way, for the Dungeon Master, you have to consider the fact that the player's character sheet is your way to affect them. And so as much as you can keep track of and build off of the things that are on the characters' sheets, the more involved the players will become and the more integrated the entire process is. The point is, you're not there to show off. If you want to show off your storytelling skills, write a fucking book or a screenplay. If you want to be a great actor, then I would suggest joining a theater troupe. All these various things come into play, but it is none of them in primary over any of the others. But the core point is to design the coaster itself so that people have a reason to want to get on the ride and then come back and ride it again. And so it's all about the scenarios. And those scenarios start off as combat scenarios in your most basic form of role-playing games, because the most basic form of role-playing games, you know, directly emerge from wargaming. And even though other games do give you very drastically different parameters and emphasize different things because of the fact that they have different rules and different design ethics, they all still, you know, exist downwind. They have all evolved out of war games in the way that birds have evolved out of lizards. You know, you don't call them the same thing anymore. They're not quite the same thing anymore, and there's quite a variety amongst them. And yet, though, there is that common lineage that is to be witnessed, especially if you, you know, take your time to go and trace things back and examine all the moving pieces and all that kind of stuff. But scenarios do not have to just necessarily be, you know, combat alone. You know, there's in each scene / scenario that's part of the chain of the story that is the adventure, there has to be some sort of goal. Now, the most simplest form of goal is survive. So that could be characters using their skills to, you know, get through some sort of disaster scenario, or to cross some sort of like horrible terrain in order to be able to reach a goal of getting to the next city. Or it can be just the raw survival of, we got to, you know, get past this wall of goblins, all that kind of stuff. However, you know, that goal can also be, we've got to talk this noble into allowing us to do the thing, or to give us the thing. Perhaps there's a way to talk your way out of the wall of goblins instead of having to butcher them all, you know, because they're still sentient creatures, even if their interests do not necessarily align with yours, and all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, you know, in much in the same way that the players are, you know, there's this like strong streak of misunderstanding that, you know, they're controlling a character, and that is the role that they're playing, as they're making this artifice. You're actuating its choices as they are presented to you. And so in the same way, like, but, you know, they find themselves that, you know, they feel like they're just playing pretend at best, that they are something else, if not just being themselves and just using the abilities that are on the character sheet for them to use within the scenario. I advocate for, like, having a bit more of a range of a detachment that you, like, there's an aspect to these games where, like, I feel like it's always been purposely overlooked and downplayed, because obviously it would make the whole genre sound bad. But, you know, there should be some advisory for people who, you know, like suffer from schizophrenia or who are susceptible to schizophrenia about getting into these kinds of things. People get way too personalized about the characters they're playing quite frequently. We all know this. This is nothing new. And, you know, you should just need to be clear that this is much more akin to an avatar in a video game than you. You are not in a play. You are not in a movie. It is not you doing things. You're not play acting as something. There are times where you will make choices for the thing that you are controlling, and sometimes you will speak in its voice. And like I said, there all these aspects of theatrics do come into play in the process of manifesting these games, but they are not the sole endpoint and goal of what you're doing here. This is all really just to kind of teach people to think strategically in different kinds of situations, which is also part of why it's kind of incumbent upon the person running this roller coaster to have variety within what's going on. It can't just all be just up, down, up, down. There's reasons why roller coasters have twists and turns and parts where you're flying around upside down and sudden drops and starting off with a big slow grind, and like there's intention into all that design. And in terms of the fact that we are, as game masters, trying to you know, design an adrenaline loop that you want your players to go on, that you should consider some of the design ethics that go into like why roller coasters are designed the way they are, as much as you should like also look into stuff like the classic 3-act structure and what kind of expectations humans naturally have out of stories, especially when they're allowed to participate actively. You're kind of in a way less likely to get dramatically weird plot twists out of the audience when the audience is an active participant, because they're trying to narrate something spontaneously, and so they're going to fall back upon you know, their basic formatted expectations that they got about what stories are about when they were young. You got to consider the cart they're in too. That is their interface. What exactly are the ability scores or attributes? What are they actually really representing? How are you using their use of those rules to you know, tailor how the feel of the universe is? It's the only way for the player to touch anything is through using the rules and rolling dice. That's why you should find excuses for people to roll dice. That you should be coming up with things to do that you know would fall under the category of dice games that aren't necessarily in your basic rule books. It's part of why like I leave my system so vague, is because I want there to be spaces for people to invent that sort of thing on their own. It's good as kind of a good creative, you know, rules design exercise if such things interest you. But you know, you're presented with a situation that the book doesn't give you, then just make something up. I know that can be kind of an odd ask. You know, that's, you know, sometimes you just don't have anything there. We all occasionally find ourselves with vapor lock. You should hopefully have already kind of considered these things about yourself before you decided to take on this strange hobby / pseudo profession that is to be a dungeon master. But you know, okay, you know, there's a misunderstanding on the game master side too. Like I was trying to say, in large part, it's the storyteller conceit. As much as you know, I'm a fan of, you know, the White Wolf games and the storyteller system. I'm divorcing the term storyteller from the branded storyteller system, lowercase storyteller. Just in the brute fact that. And you know, in a way, White Wolf is correct. You know, we are kind of tapping into this ancient sit around the campfire and everyone tell a story about their adventures hunting animals in the wild kind of thing that role-playing games touches upon, that has not really, you know, been a part of you know, human culture in several centuries for many people. And so like it plucks a string that human beings have kind of forgotten that we have. Kind of a thing. It's part of why I think role-playing games are good and should be promoted to more people. It should just be, you know, with the understanding that, like, no, it's not for everybody, and there are occasionally going to be people who are attracted to it who are also wrong for it. Part of being a good dungeon master is you have to learn how to be able to discriminate who are trustworthy and who are untrustworthy people, because you have to learn how to have the gumption to, give people the boot when necessary. But you also at the same time have to learn how to ride a fine line so that you do not come across as a tyrant. It is important more than anything else that you be a fair arbiter. As much as the players should not overly personalize their player characters, it is incumbent upon all of us to not overly personalize things like our NPCs or particular plot events that we were hoping to happen. Because the thing that makes this different than a standard roller coaster is that you have multiple tracks occasionally branching away from each other, and there will be points where suddenly the people in the cart can start riding track ahead of you. It's part of why I'm also going to say something controversial. Run shorter games. Stick to 2 or 3 hours tops. Prepare your material just for the session ahead of you. Give yourself, a bunch of different things already planned out. Go ahead and have basic stats for all the potential monsters. Try to pre-factor out, what your players might decide, and already have different scenarios planned. Even if what they ultimately end up doing doesn't quite match any of these things, if you have like 3 or 4 alternate scenarios, you can kind of cobble something together out of these materials on the fly, and then that way you at least have something that's prepared, and you're not just sitting there going, looking at a book for 15 to 20 minutes while everyone's sitting around getting bored, and, the whole narrative thrust and momentum of your game is falling apart all around you. You can avoid all that with just taking a little time to prepare, and if you want to be able to have a reasonable amount of preparation, well, shorter games are the way to go. We all have fond memories of being kids and school back then, when you had nothing but free time and all the time in the world to hang out with your insanely large circle of people who you called friends and play games for 8 to 12 hours at a time. But, we all got to grow up. It's a bit easier of an ask to make for your players. Hey, can you sacrifice a couple hours a week, as opposed, can you just give me every fucking Saturday for the rest of your life? Also, just focusing on just what's ahead instead of trying to build out gigantic super campaign arcs. Those are great when they can manifest, but you'll feel more satisfied if you find that your group collapses after you've finished at least a small adventure, so it felt like there's some sort of button put on what was going on, so that everything isn't just some unresolved campaign that freezes halfway through the second book of Lord of the Rings and then the rest of it's never written. Try not to be a George R.R. Martin in that way. Actually, in a couple different ways. Don't over detail your shit. Something I learned about writing when I was younger. I still have outlines for things that I would consider to be my attempt to write a Dune or a Star Wars kind of shit. And I've made several stabs at writing them when I was in my 20s. And I'd get 60 to 80 pages into the goddamn thing, and I still hadn't even introduced any characters or started a scene, because I'm still just describing all this fucking backstory, just trying to make sure that the people reading it actually understand what the fuck I'm talking about when it starts off, and there's this genetically engineered dingo dude in space on the edge of the solar system and blah blah blah. It wasn't until I read some old Robert Howard, and it just suddenly kind of just dawned on me, just reading the old Conan, the original Conan stories from the 20s and 30s, of I could just say there's a castle on the hill and Conan rides past, and leave it at that. You as soon as you say you see a castle on the hill, you already got an image in your head. The more I stop to describe the castle in every single minute detail, it starts to then conflict with the initial impression you had in your head. What if I tell you the stone is gray and it's got 3 towers and one of those looping archways that spans over a ravine with a rushing river that goes by? At some point it's going to start divorcing from your imagination, and then you're going to be putting your focus on trying to rebuild this image you have in your head, and while doing that, you're kind of losing track of what the fuck was going on with Conan riding past the hill with the castle on it. You could have just said there's a castle on the hill and go. George R.R. Martin is like that. He could just say, you see a couple guards as you walk through the gates, but no, he's got to tell you their full names and stuff about why they got to fucking hawk on their chest and shit about their grandparents and even hints about things from 1,000 years ago, and all that's well and good and creative, good for you, buddy, but, you know, you've never finished your fucking books, and you let a couple of hacks tell the end of your story, and now, why would you ever even want to write it after seeing how people have reacted to the end of it? You're either going to have to come up with something radically different, or you're chaining yourself to write something out that people aren't going to like anyway. Oh my God, you know, so try not to fall into those kinds of pitfalls with your game mastering. Keep it quick and snappy and keep it moving. A roller coaster's got to have a certain pacing. There's points where the players on their own will eventually like, hey, can we pump on the brakes so we can like actually learn what the fuck we're doing? And then like give them those opportunities, but try to wait for them to ask for the exposition dump. Don't just lay it all in their laps. Give them a reason to be starting off together. Don't just like have them be a bunch of random people in a bar and just hope that they'll understand that they need to go talk to that ranger who keeps giving them the eye from the bar, you know, and that they're not having to like amateur shit where they're just, you know, role playing, trying to figure out why they would even hang out together or go to do this thing. Give them an easy, basic opening scenario that can be resolved almost immediately, but ties them together a little bit and kind of gives them at least the beginning of some sort of interest in what's going on in whatever the little area you have prepared for them to adventure in, even if the greater adventure is not even itself tied to that opening scenario. You just need to give them something that makes them already feel like they're anchored together at the start. You know, instead of talking them in to accepting 100 gold to go clear out the dungeon, start them off telling them that you've accepted 100 gold. Go clear out this dungeon. You surprisingly, like a lot of players take to that shit a lot easier than allowing them to suss it out on their own for some reason. There's exceptions, obviously. You know, just keep it snappy. Try to like, you know, build in as much as possible, like some sort of like common hook that everyone has, so it feels like it's natural and not some weird cobbled together fit. Don't run your games too long. Be over prepared. That goes hand in hand though with keeping your game sessions to a more reasonable size. You know, remember that there is storycraft involved, but like your primary goal is to basically, you know, create a chain of experiences that keeps your players to keep showing back up, so you can keep doing this thing and justify all the money you just spent on all these books and dice and game master screens and all that kind of shit. You know, you want to get some sort of bang for your buck. Thankfully, movies and movie tickets have become so expensive when you really stop and look at it. You know, it's like $20 per person just to go see a movie once. You know, like if you get a good value role-playing game, like the kind of shit I do, that's like less than one person's movie ticket, and you can play it with a bunch of people multiple fucking times. Even the more expensive mainstream shit, you know, as much as I myself am like, I don't like seeing the fact that we're starting to have books that are up there at the $70, $80 to the $80 mark just to be able to, you know, get material and source material for your game and all that kind of stuff. You know, that's 4 people's movie ticket. If you can get at least that many people to play once, you've made your money's value out of having purchased the role-playing game just in terms of entertainment value, right? So in some ways, like, and by having a YouTube channel, I'm able to kind of somewhat justify my library just because I can talk about the books every once in a while. You know, it's just, I've always been prone to kind of rotating through things. It's another reason why, you know, if you find that you have trouble sticking to shit because you keep jumping around between different kinds of games, it's a thing I've certainly had even up to this day to some degree. That's another reason to just focused on the immediate adventure scenario. Just focus on the one ride. If they want to get back on the ride and you feel like designing some, you know, a second edition of that ride for further adventures, fine. But, you know, you should just make sure that the one ride's good, and should always just focus on making sure that the ride that the people are about to go on is as good as you can make it. You know, and if you feel like jumping between one game and another, well, you know, if you just design a D&D game that's only going to run for, you know, one adventure, and then you run it, you've finished it, You didn't give people expectations that this is going to like last for the next 5 years of their life. And so that when you ask them, hey, would you like to try playing a Star Trek adventure, they might be more likely to say, hey, that's cool, instead of being like, not again. You know, you set the expectations that people have, and so to some degree, if people feel disappointed in what you're doing, that's your fault for raising the bar and then failing to meet it. So, you know, part of being a dungeon master is being mature enough to know thyself. And so, at risk of saying anything else, check the description box below where you can find links to all my shit. This right here is the Ancient Egyptian Spellbook. It's a all crunch, going into full description of how to use both divine and occult skills within all my various games, such as Expedition to Ancient Egypt and Ghosts of the Shadow Zone, and so on and so forth. Until next time, be waspinated and stay out there.